This is Start, Launch, Grow, brought to you by Million Labs.
Here's what we cover in today's episode. In our catch-up section, we talk about when to kill an idea. Then Simon will sit down with David Bourne, founder of SimPat, to discuss his start, launch, grow journey. And finally, we wrap up with one clear takeaway. Let's get started.
Hey, Verena, how's it going?
I'm doing well. I'm very excited about today's topic, which is probably one of the most underrated founder skills. It's quitting. It's about quitting an idea. We always hear people being told that they should never give up, right? Resilience is important, grit is important. And yes, that might be true for a lot of situations. But what we found is that sometimes it really makes sense to just stop and rethink actually what you do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's really uncomfortable, isn't it, to quit and say, look, actually, this amazing idea that I have is actually not an amazing idea, and I'm going to quit. And I guess if we look at the lean startup methodology that we've talked about previously, is the build, measure, learn loop. What we're finding that lots of founders are kind of doing the build and the measure, but not necessarily the learn piece. So they're trying to kind of interpret their data to justify their idea rather than the other way around of like looking at actually what's the data telling me. And so they're kind of extending the length, probably what they're finding is that there is no product market fit here. There's no market pull for this idea, yet they're manipulating the data and kind of trying to persuade themselves that actually this is a real thing.
And maybe before we dive into the details here, it's also important to just distinguish, when you should push things through and when you should stop and reflect. Because obviously, there are always challenges, right? And we are not saying that whenever it gets difficult, you should just kill an idea. What we encourage you is to really just think wisely or watch out for signals that are quite clear, that are clearly showing you now it's time to just rethink the business model overall. And actually, I looked it up this morning. There's a studies from CB Insights that just says that 42% of founders fail because there's no market fit, right? And I think, Simon, this is also what we are seeing, with our own data from Startup Lab.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we see exactly the same data that, the reality is that most of our startups will launch and be gone dead in 7 months. That's kind of what our data shows you. And now that includes kind of that launch or that start phase of doing the idea validation, the launch phase, and then into the grow and then dead. And very few of them actually give it very long in the grow at all, because that's when it gets really hard, is in that grow phase when you're having to actually acquire customers, talk to customers, figure out why they're not buying or why they're not signing up. So yeah, we definitely see that in the data.
Most founders don't fail because they quit too early, but they fail because they quit too late. And I think we are all a bit guilty about it because, when we look at the reasons why this is the case, right, it's almost like, I think the number one reason is like the startup becomes your identity. We see it as same, right? Like it's, like you spend so much time. It's almost like your baby, right? So the problem with that is that if you fail, it's often seen as a personal failure. So it's like your startup and your identity almost failed, right? And this is, I think, the like a dangerous path that we see, where you don't look at the rational data, but you kind of always refer it back to you as a person. And I think the other bit that we see quite often is, right, just founders often say to us, like, oh, I spent so much time and so much money on that idea. But, you should always ask yourself, like, given what we know today, is it still the right decision to invest more of my time in that idea? So it's a bit like the concept of sunk costs, right? Where you try to kind of justify your current behavior with your past investments. And we really encourage you to pay attention to that and always try to look at data points.
Yeah, I think regardless of what's already been done, what you've already done to date, it's, as you say, it's about looking at the data and making a decision. Is this worth continuing? Am I getting the right signals that this is a viable business, or am I not? And if we kind of look at that in the start, launch, grow framework, where can we look at those signals? And in the start phase, before you even build, you're testing demand, you're trying to verify that your idea does have a market, so that you're not getting to the position where you've got lots of sunk cost, but actually you're verifying it as early as you can with as little cost as possible. Because if you can do a month's worth of research and go, actually, this is not viable, I should walk away now. Well, that's much better than spending 6 months and thousands of dollars or pounds. We always recommend building a landing page to test that idea in that start phase. So it doesn't take very much capital or expertise to build a landing page out with your value proposition on. If you've got nobody signing up to that landing page, whether that's just like, give us your email address, we'll let you know when it's launching. If you've got nobody signing up to that, or it's really hard to get people to sign up to that, you've got very low percentages, then that's probably a good signal that this isn't resonating. And you either need to kind of iterate that idea, like change the landing page, change the value proposition and try again, or it's just not a viable, market. We would say if you can't convert probably something like 5 to 10% of your traffic, so that's the number of individuals that are viewing that landing page. If you can't convert like 5% of those to just giving you an email or something fairly basic like that, it's not like they're paying for it at this stage, then actually there's probably not a good value proposition here.
What's also key is to try out different messaging, because sometimes the same idea can be sold in 10 different ways. Now you build the MVP, right? You have a waiting list, people signed up, right? You build the MVP, you go out. Now, like what we now recommend you to do is to really look at the user's behavior. One scenario that happens very often is that people come to us, they're very excited, they say, oh, Simon and Verena, we have 100 new people that signed up. And that's great. I mean, that's the first signal. But now we need to look at, okay, how many out of the 100 people actually use the app? How many came back to the app? And how many actually paid for it? Sometimes start with a freemium or give like a bit of a lower price at the beginning. But there should be one feature in your app that already provides value and that people are willing to pay for. And that can be like a $10 one. I mean, it depends on your industry, etc. But look for a no-brainer. Look for something that you can already monetize in the first month. Because if you are not able to convert your users into paid users, right, you don't really have a business. What's important here is to kill the idea if you're not able to convert users we recommend within the first 3 months. Don't kill the idea yet if you have a lot of users, but they don't do anything in the app. You have people basically signing up, but then the UX is not there, right? Like it's too complicated, they are confused, etc. So here we recommend you actually to talk to your customers and work with a designer to just facilitate that journey.
And it might be that you've got, as you say, people signing up, but they're not willing to pay because the feature they want isn't there yet. Now, that's great feedback. That's exactly what you want. It might be, well, we thought we were going to be able to monetize this feature, but it turns out it's this feature over here and they all want that one. So now's your chance to add that feature in and then go back to the existing user base and re-energize them and try and get them to pay. That's a good indicator. That's good positive signal. It just requires a bit more work and a bit more investment into it. It's when you've got nothing, you've got no users signing up, or they sign up and they never log in again. They never do anything. They won't answer your feedback requests. They're not responding to an email. They're not responding to a telephone call or anything like that. That's a sure sign that actually it just doesn't hit any of the bases. Let's talk about, so we've done that start, we've done the launch. What about in grow? If you get to the grow phase, which is you've launched the minimum viable product or the MVP, you've had a bunch of users, and now we're looking at kind of that retention of users and obviously the monetization of our users. And our rule of thumb, and it does change between the different industry types and who you're selling to and so forth, is that you kind of really want something like 20% plus of regular users. Now, regular is a word that will change between the different app types, because somebody, some things, let's say it's an annual subscription, they might use the product once a year to do their tax return or something. So that's a very different to, let's say, a game where you want people logging in every day to use the game or something like that. So it does very much depend, but you're looking at that kind of 20% plus of users that are regularly using it. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult to monetize if you can't get to those kind of ratios. This is the key to kind of all of these things is can you get the cost of acquisition to a point where you can acquire a customer for less money than you're going to make from that over their lifetime with you? Are you starting to see some kind of organic referrals? Are you seeing, unsolicited feedback? People are just sending you emails, sending you X, Twitter, whatever, Instagram, whatever medium you're using, they're sending you feedback. And, are you getting inbound interest, as in organic people hitting the website or the app or so forth? If you're not seeing any of those, that's pretty good indicators that, again, the value proposition isn't quite resonating. If you've been unable to bring any of your landing page signups into actual users, again, there's a gap there somewhere. They were willing to sign up to the value proposition, but now they're not willing to actually execute and follow that up with, signing up to the app. So why is that? What's wrong? What did we get right at this stage, but now have got wrong at this stage? So all of these are kind of important signals. The reality is you have to constantly push, cajole, and grab users and pull them in by the scruff of their neck, because they're not going to do anything just because you exist.
I guess before we dive into our interview of today, we wanted to also give you something practical at hand, like something that you can just try out, right? So we call it a 30-day kill test, right? And what it means is that you have one idea you have around for too long, right? Or you have multiple ideas where you can't decide which ones to go for. We encourage you to spin up a landing page for each, at least, for each. And, just do that within the first week. Then, try to add campaign against it, right? So run a, ads campaign, 300 to $50 is what we recommend. Share it with your network. Have a wait list and see what happens. Look at click rate, right, of the ads campaign, and look at the signups, right? Like what we explained before, how many users are willing to have early access. You don't need the full project yet. Don't need that yet, right? We can all label everything under coming soon, right? It's just about validation. We have a template for that. If you want to get a copy, just comment that below the section.
Great. So let's just kind of recap on what we've learned. Do the 30-day kill test, try and validate your idea. Let's make sure that there is some signal there, that there is a market need, that the value proposition resonates with your user base, customer base. When you get into the launch phase, make sure that you've got users actually signing up for your MVP and that they're starting to do stuff on the app, maybe purchasing, but actually certainly engaging with it. And then as you go into the grow phase, is like we want returning customers, we want new customers to be arriving organically, etc. So all of these are good signals that the things are working. And if at any stage they're not, that's it. Either pivot and change the idea to match what the customer is asking for, or seriously consider about walking away because you've already put in quite a lot of time and effort to get to that stage. Actually, you're better to walk away with and try a new idea than you are to continue grinding against something that's just not going to work. There's no signal here to say that this is going to work.
Opportunity costs are too high these days, so it's always worth rethinking. Great, then let's dive into today's interview.
So big welcome to the pod, David, CEO of SimPat. I won't steal any of your thunder, David. I'll let you tell us kind of how did you get started? What was the start phase of this? How did the idea come about? And tell us a bit about what SimPat is.
Yeah, I'll do a bit of vice versa. Very quick line. Effectively, SimPat is an online medical education platform, AI-powered for medical students. That's a sort of one line of what we are. And I guess the origin stories was from myself, solo founded it for about half a year. And that was about 3 years ago now, so quite a while. And it was definitely born out of a frustration, I would say. I was a medical student at the time. We've got a couple different types of examinations. One is like you sit down, big exam hall, lots of knowledge tests. And the other was a more practical, you walk into a room, you've got a fake patient. You've got to diagnose, treat them as you would in real life. Where I'm now a doctor working in the UK as well. So kind of the real life stuff as well. The frustration was mainly about the revision resources we had when it came to the practical exams. We found that there was very few online resources that are quite useful. And there's very few opportunities to kind of get stuck into the real wards as a medical student. It's naturally a very high pressure scenario and environment where you aren't quite able to get as involved as you would like to potentially. And then other things were like big chunky books that you couldn't really bring around with you, etc. So it was definitely that frustration. There was both a lack of quantity of revision resources, but also there was a huge driver of they limited and lacked that diversity, especially in the socioeconomic details of patients that we really strive for. So there was definitely a lack of representation and diversity that I think was quite frustrating, especially that I've come to a very big city working with lots of different patients. It would have been really nice to have that practice as a medical student as well. So I think those are the really big drivers, both of the quality of content that was out there, but also of the diversity and representation of the content that was out there.
How did you go about validating that beyond just like your friends that were in the same sort of bubble? Was this just a bubble problem, or or was this true outside of the university you were at?
Yeah, it was definitely a really interesting one because obviously I had really individual experience. I had years of just individual frustration. Voice it to the close friends, obviously quite unique because our audience and also creators and kind of executive team were both our market audience and also the team creating it. So that was really helpful because obviously we have that insight, but also that ability to network with kind of wider and wider audiences with little focus groups of people that we could get from kind of leveling a range of levels of medical students, and also just online, a lot of online forums and a lot of feedback from other UK university medical students as well. So yeah, definitely very helpful. We had already quite a wide team that had that knowledge, but also lots of little forums, little groups of our target audience, which we had a good network to. So that was quite helpful indeed.
Okay, so you've kind of validated it, like there's something in this. I'm now going to build something. I'm going to move into the kind of build phase. What did you build? What was like version 1 or 0.1 or whatever you wanted to call it? What was that? What did that look like?
I laugh because I don't know if I can even call it a point one. It was, I think the first physical / online thing was probably after half a year of myself learning JSON and very bad coding, was somewhat of an MVP of an AI simulation back in 2022 maybe, where it was effectively the most basic AI simulation where it would be a fake patient, you'd type to it and it would reply with absolutely no user interface whatsoever. However, that was enough to get the ball rolling, get the first team members who were also quite senior medical students, get them intrigued, make them realize that actually this might be possible. And then also that's when the funding started, showing that we were serious about this, that it could be done. And also there were other use cases, for example, with different type of content that we could also be creating alongside these more novel AI simulation type stuff. So extremely basic. And I'm very glad we've got an amazing team that are now doing all the coding, full stack, designing, marketing aspects. But that was technically the first thing that was probably created for.
And then you mentioned funding there. So I guess you're in the lucky position. Your university had a VC effectively attached to it, or a university kind of spin out team that had funding. So talk us through that. How do you go about finding them and getting that first bit of investment?
Yeah, so I think I was really fortunate as a uni student up in Scotland at the time, when obviously not at the moment. Now we're mainly in full-time work. But at the time, a few years ago, as I mentioned, at university, there was an incredible ecosystem, especially up in Scotland, which I'd totally recommend. And that was definitely another lucky fortune where there, as you said, there was a kind of VC linked university alongside a lot of other grants, especially linked with the university. So that was really helpful. We had really easy access to them, both access in person where you could go chat for advisory type recommendations and advice, but also there was quite structured kind of VC potential, grant potential, and a lot of really good advisory people at the university. So yeah, definitely a real benefit to us at the early stages, especially.
And I guess that funding then allowed you to start to get the product a little bit off your own merits and then into some dedicated resource to get it built out. And I guess that's what you through to what version kind of 1 maybe released, or version 2, whatever you want to call it, but a releasable version through that funding. Is that right?
Yeah, I think from there we then got a real MVP, I would call it, where you can really show a platform that looked like a platform that was user friendly and had actual content that was usable. That was really useful to get our first 3 users and kind of the range of users as well. It was probably a bit bitty in terms of ideally we would have just come to the top tier million labs from the very get-go, built up. But I think natural startup progression is you keep going through these phases of first starting with literally just me creating something very small, bit of funding that creates something slightly bigger, MVP kind of 1, something that shows a bit more of the platform that users can technically use. And then eventually get to the point where I think we are at now, where you've got the top tier, kind of everything covered from a platform, full stack type picture, where you can then go fully commercial, which is like obviously very exciting. Ideally you would skip to it, but I think and appreciate all startups probably are going through that slow cycle of building something, proving it, more funding, getting to the top slowly but surely.
That initial MVP that got launched, you started to bring on, I think you said free users. So you're onboarding free users and getting, I guess, good feedback from those free users, and then iterating on it. So you've kind of launched, but you're not into revenue yet, I guess. So what did those iterations look like, and when did sort of revenue start to appear?
Yeah, there was a huge amount going on at that time. I think the iterations were a lot of content. We are kind of content revision resource, so a huge amount of it was creating a large content base, and all the iterations were as we got feedback, we would keep changing the content, and we had a very nice, huge team of fantastic students and doctors that were creating this content that I would have to keep iterating as the new users would come on board with their new feedback. And I think that was really useful to have users from effectively the get-go, so we could keep testing and iterating, see what they like, see what they don't like. There's a huge amount of very small pivoting throughout the whole process. And I think that's really beneficial rather than having a team insight from 4 years or 3 years ago, building that through over 3 years, launching it, and then actually, oh wait, this probably wasn't what the end user actually wanted in the end. Whereas getting some free users from the very get-go, even when we had very minimal, was really helpful to keep us on a track that was most amenable and most kind of appetizing to medical students in the UK and globally as well. So yeah, that was very helpful indeed.
So you kind of went through some of those small iterations, etc., into what we would term the grow phase. So now you've properly launched, you've done a few iterations. What have been the kind of stepping stones to revenue then? What did you need to add? So you said content was one, to try and get a larger content base, and I guess some of that was due to with some of the competitors in the market that also got relatively sized. So there was some table stakes for entering that market in terms of getting to that point. But what else have you done since?
So kind of speaking from experience of getting to here, obviously we're just beginning those revenue stages, which are really exciting. But in terms of to get to a place, I think, where we are now commercial and about to go full marketing campaign into the exam season or summertime effectively, I think there's a few main aspects that we had to kind of nail. Obviously, the value offer is the biggest thing. We took years to create something that had or has great value potential for customers. For example, we've now got content that is both more than the current traditional kind of status quo, so kind of going above and beyond them, better quality in our eyes in terms of kind of comprehensiveness, and also the cost structure makes it more affordable to students. But the most important, at least in our eyes especially, some of the mission statements around the both accessibility but that diversity representation, the frustration factors that it was all born out of, we've kept throughout the process. I think that was a huge part of the offering, that we are showing medical students their diversity and how it was grown out of people who've gone through it just as themselves. So they kind of see that we've done what they're hoping to achieve of passing finals, become doctors, etc. And that we've then also created the product that we wish we had, which I think is a really powerful kind of motive, but also a story as well. And then that kind of leads on to the credibility. Obviously, we're not the status quo by any means yet or anything, but I think the credibility is something that will be very slow but surely gotten, and that's probably one of the hardest things that we'll probably have as a challenge, kind of going forward into the revenue. Obviously, battling all the big status quo things that have been here for decades. No matter how amazing, incredible, perfect your new startup product is, I think there will always be a huge time before you have that amazing, even if it's perfect or so, before then actually gaining all the credibility of your end user. So I think that'll be the kind of slower side of it all versus the actual just creating the platform and the product as well.
In terms of commercials, it's a subscription model. So you're charging each student effectively a subscription for access to the platform on I don't know, is it monthly, quarterly, yearly? What does that look like?
Yeah, effectively a monthly. It's slightly different for us. We are based around the exam timetable of medical students, both in the UK and globally, which are very slightly different depending on where you are. In the UK, it's mainly in the summer, so effectively all our marketing, everything's gearing up from the team for the summer. Kind of June, July is the vast majority of medical student examinations, at least. So it's monthly, kind of by 3-month packages, probably the most common, or will be the most common. So that is probably a bit different for us. So creating all the plans that have very large influxes throughout the year is definitely a bit of a challenge as well, especially when it comes to the creating that with the funding cycles, the marketing cycles, and creating all of that into one kind of coherent plan is definitely slightly different to potentially a model that is more sustainable and more consistent throughout the year at least versus the fluctuations that we'll have to kind of face. So yeah, that it will be the main model. But obviously I think going for multiple different angles is a really strong point. So in terms of also looking at B2B with university licenses, I think will be a really powerful one. We've got a great team that have done some research and done some publications and some presentations at conferences. So that'll be nice when we go to the more the university type side for the licenses, and then also other kind of sponsorship or licenses from people who are doing similar work, but in a very slightly different aspect of medical education potentially, where we can then work with them in a quite a nice pairing potentially. It would be another aspect, but definitely the main one for the moment is the kind of B2C premium or freemium model that we'll be running as well.
We call you a bit of a side hustler because you're doing it alongside your studies to start with, and now alongside you're now qualified. So you're now doing it alongside a job. So just talk through some of the challenges of trying to juggle those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a double-edged sword in a way. Obviously, one side of it is incredibly hard and very difficult, especially with all the time pressures of both being a medical student and now being a doctor for the last kind of half year or so. That is by far the most pressurizing thing, especially when your team as well, similar positions. When it's a very tough winter in the NHS, for example, when the whole team are kind of put against the wall, that definitely adds a lot of pressure. On the flip side, because we are creating something that we inherently have a lot of passion for and a lot of acute knowledge for, the more we progress through our medical school, through our doctor years, the more value we can add to the company and the platform and the content. So in that way, I think it's really beneficial. The more I'm learning and the more that I learned through university was actually the more I could help build more content, better content, more appropriate stuff, more insight as well into the students that we're trying to help as well. And the motivation, I think that was probably the key thing with the team that we found, especially the exec team. Having done all those difficult years and graduating and becoming doctors, I think that was the real driver that keeps us going, even though we've got quite a tough work schedule at most of the time. But the fact that we are kind of trying to give back a bit and trying to do something quite useful for our colleague cohort, future colleagues, and kind of future people that will work alongside, I think is very useful, but definitely very tough. And I think hopefully it will progress to more of a full-time thing potentially. So that is, yeah, definitely the end goal, especially, but everything takes a long time. So patience is definitely the best virtue, if not one of them.
And I guess it brings quite a lot of credibility that you're a qualified doctor. You've been through this journey and relatively recently. So actually, the product that you're generating is very of the moment and with a very high understanding of the challenges and the frustrations that fellow medical students were going through. So I think that adds quite a lot of weight to the proposition. What are the kind of two takeaways from this? The kind of one, I guess a negative takeaway, what was harder than you thought it was? And then what's worked, or what would you recommend to other founders or SME CEOs?
The one hardest thing that I found over the last 3.5 years is having the patience and consistency. I think it's an incredible position to now have done 3.5 years of really hard work with an incredible team. However, there's definitely been points in those 3.5 years where it's definitely been huge amounts of time where you're working every day, if not, more than nearly every day throughout the whole of doing other tough stuff like medical school. And there's been long stints of months where you're feeling like you're not progressing, you're not really getting anywhere. Things are not going your way. You're taking blows from kind of every side, from financial, users, platform. Everything doesn't seem to be moving. So I think patience has definitely been the one challenge, I would say, and real tough thing that we've had to have as a team, and myself as the founder. And that's definitely been the one thing I think. I'm so grateful that we've now come through a very long time period of 3.5 years of just pure grind effectively, where actually looking back, some of those months especially have been really, really tough in terms of waking up every day, doing the work every single day, feeling like not progressing, but actually you eventually are, and you are getting somewhere. So I think that was definitely the tough aspect. And then on the flip side, in terms of a key takeaway, I would say the one thing that has battled that, encountered that, has been both the accountability and the motivation of both having a fantastic team, but also external people, advisors, investors, grants, awards, etc. People that keep you accountable for all those years. Because I would have definitely not be here if I didn't have any accountability from the team I have or the early investors, the investors I now have as well. So I think that is the one thing, keeping accountable and motivated. And I think personally, I find that best when you have a fantastic either co-founders, team, wider team, or external people like your investors, like your grant systems in place, or just any advisors, or even just family and friends who are really knowing all the steps and the challenges you are going through. I think that's absolutely the most vital thing that I found. And that amazing system around you is definitely the one system that will keep you motivated, accountable, and actually get you through the tough challenges that I spoke about. And without them, I would have given up within months, a year, for example. But thankfully, I've got them in place.
Well, it was great to chat with you, David. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon.
Hi, Simon. Welcome back. Good chat with David. What would you say is one of the insights that you got out of the interview with David?
I think the key insight was, many good things, but was around accountability. I think David said an interesting thing, which was if he hadn't had people to hold him accountable, and he's got investors, co-founders, etc. If he hadn't had those, he'd have probably given up. Having that accountability, somebody to say, talk to, and answer questions to, has been absolutely key. So I think that's a good one for founders and SME CEOs to take away.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe for more conversations like this. We also share practical start, launch, grow insights in our newsletter. Just visit medialabs.co.uk to learn more. Thanks for listening and see you next time.